China is definitely becoming a more interesting place for a lot of foreigners to travel, to work, to study here. Definitely when I was in school it was not a very common thing, but now when I talk to college students in the US it seems to be more of an interest, so I can definitely see why that is, and there's a lot of options here.
The only thing I could credit it to might be potentially Americans are becoming more aware of China, they're learning more about it. Chinese is now being taught in many universities and schools, so the culture is starting to seep into the American fabric a little more than in the past.
Then maybe, I mean, it depends what you think about what's happening in the US, of course, but it would make sense that China is being more open to the world and trying to, for example, in Davos, talking about how they are in favor of globalization and how the US should not close up and stop trade and stuff like that. So I think it does make sense maybe then comparatively people would see the China as a power that is rising, but is also trying to make to have a good influence in global trade and global relationships.
I think there's been a tremendous amount of good news coming out of China in the last 10, 15 years. And I think Americans are becoming more and more aware of that.
And that's really the one that surprises me the most, 2 years, because we've gone through another political administration. Perhaps people, for all I know, maybe American people who are surveyed are thinking of immigrating to China.
I've seen a dramatic pace of change just in the short time that I've been here. And more recently, I think that what we've seen not only is that there's this general economic development, but we've seen China take a lead in certain areas, such as artificial intelligence, mobile technology, the sharing economy, and so forth.
When I was a boy, I was reading a famous story called Sanguo. And I started playing video games, and that was really my exposure to Chinese culture. Without that, I would have had no concept of China, no opinions whatsoever. So it sounds silly, but that's what stuck with me as a child. And as we talk about the survey, we talk about seeing improvements in the younger generation, especially their perception of China. I think you can credit it back to these little micro exposures, whether it's things by the Hanban Institute, whether it's Chinese movies that are coming, or even Chinese fashion styles that are starting to permeate. And that is absolutely going to make a big difference, just like American products have influenced the favorability of Americans in China.
I think in general, like, it has always been like this, right? Younger people are more open to other cultures, to changes in the status quo and things like that. So it does make a little bit more sense that younger people are more open to Chinese growth.
It's hard to decipher that, but I imagine that, again, probably media sources plays a role. Also, if I had to guess, I would say that the historical changes that have taken place in China bring it from a somewhat closed communist economy to this more open socialist economy with Chinese characteristics, market forces, competition, and so forth. And so I think probably older Americans remember the China of the 1960s and 1970s, and the younger people see the China of today. I'm old enough to remember the China of the 1960s and the 1970s, and probably if I were not living in China and didn't have the exposure I have, my views of what's going on would be somewhat out of date.
I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the future. I think China's developing really well with technology, things like that. People are using apps and things for basically everything in their daily lives, so it will definitely keep improving, I think. I think it'll make it more interesting for people to come and people to live here easier, even without knowing the language, and being able to adapt to life here.
Even though there are tensions that are arising from our leadership, in the United States, related to trade wars, related to North Korean matters, what have you. I think generally the average person really isn't affected or doesn't care much about that at all in forming their own opinion, and we base it on what influences us directly. And I think as long as China is continuing to have positive influences in people's actual lives, the political tensions will not be a decisive factor.
China looks very stable right now, so I guess it will continue to grow in the same way as it has been. It has also a lot of challenges, of course, but from what I understand, the leadership in China knows how to tackle these problems. So we'll see what it happens. I mean, I'm very interested in China. I'm fascinated by the country, so I hope that it keeps growing. I have the chance to keep learning about it. So we'll see.
So I think that there is a lag, and I think that what will happen is that over time, U.S. citizens will get more and more exposure to Chinese products, not just the manufactured products, but the services that come through the internet. So they will see competition to social media, they will see competition to Amazon and other services from Chinese companies, and this will give them a better idea of how dynamic the Chinese economy is today.